It's Principles of Passion.
I have a dream.
With hosts Chris Thomas and Mickey Grace.
We really envision a world where all youth are inspired to find, define, and follow their passion.
This idea that we're going to be able to bring together so many creative thinkers, so many young people, and so many industry leaders.
In order to follow your dreams,
I have a dream today.
You have to put your passion first.
Coming up tonight, Chris and Mickey sit down with Dr. Celeste A. Jackson, PhD, LPC. She's a psychotherapist at Sierra Center for Behavioral Health. Dr. Jackson is a mental health restorative justice practitioner. She's also an auditor for the State of Illinois Division of Substance Use Prevention and Recovery, as well as an adjunct faculty at Lindsey Wilson College. We also have Stephen A. Jackson, a restorative justice practitioner with over 12 years of experience. Stephen is a teen service specialist with the Oak Park Public Library, and as founder and CEO of Global Community Associates, Stephen is building the community through evidence-based restorative practices. This is Principles of Passion. Let's get it, y'all.
Welcome, y'all. Welcome to Principles of Passion. We are here on another beautiful day. Thank y'all for coming on, Dr. Jackson and Mr. Stevens, sir. How are y'all doing today?
I'm still learning.
We're doing pretty good. We're doing as well as can be expected and during these times. So it's a very loaded question, but we're doing our best right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Nikki, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. Super excited to have this conversation with Dr. Jackson and Stephen. I know that, man, it's crazy because as someone who considers myself to be a creative, an artist, and then also someone who lives with mental health issues, this is just such an important conversation for me. And I'm just so happy to kind of just dig deep into this discussion. So tonight, everyone, we are going to be talking about creativity at the intersection of mental health and creativity. And we have two special guests tonight, and I'm going to just start off by introducing our first guest. Stephen A. Jackson is a restorative practitioner with over 12 years of experience. As a teen service specialist with the Oak Park Public Library, Stephen is dedicated to providing dynamic programming to engaging communities of vulnerable populations. Stephen is a dedicated mentor to teens, youth, and he has also curated youth development engagement models that has been adopted and implemented by several educational institutions. As the founder and CEO of Global Community Associates, Stephen provides individualized, effective training through evidence-based restorative practices. Stephen is a longtime resident of both Austin and Oak Park, and he currently resides in Oswego with his wife, who is right next to him. And I just learned today with his wife. He is a proud graduate of Lewis University. Stephen, how you doing tonight?
I am still learning.
Still learning.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that is the perfect answer. Still learning. We're so happy to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, man. Big ups, man. I appreciate you. Dr. Celeste Jackson, this is my first time meeting her, so I'm just excited to learn more about you and what you do. So again, I appreciate both of y'all coming on. Dr. Jackson's a mental health restorative justice practitioner. She completed her doctoral studies at National Louis University in community psychology, where she also earned a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. As a licensed professional counselor, she integrates an ecological approach to serving clients and communities by providing dynamic individual and group counseling services and also professional development training services to organizations looking to implement evidence-based restorative justice practices. Dr. Jackson is an auditor as well for the State of Illinois Division of Substance Use Prevention and Recovery, and also a faculty at Lindsey Wilson College. So, thank you. What do you, with our topic today being, that intersection of mental health and creativity. I'll just start with you, Dr. Jackson. What comes to mind when you think of that?
There are a couple things that come to mind, and I think that this is really time discussion to have with you all, because obviously mental health is such a highly discussed topic given the state of affairs in our nation, state of affairs that aren't new, but are now seeming to come to the forefront of people's minds, and they're wanting to be a part of this necessary discussion. So to think about mental health, that intersection of mental health and creativity, you have to take into account that that's a community of people, and almost everyone is involved, because creativity is such a fluid experience. And I know that one of the questions that I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself that you want to ask, but how do I define creativity? And a really great definition is by an actress, Mary Lou Cook, who said creativity is inventing, experimenting, growing, taking risks, breaking rules, making mistakes, and having fun. And I think that describes what any of us could do. And we all have the potential to do that. And so understanding that that's where creativity is, and mental health is a spectrum that we all kind of teeter along this. Sometimes we're well, sometimes we're unwell. When I think about that intersectionality of those two things together, I think of a global community of people, and representative of a lot of us.
That's so interesting to hear you say that, because I feel like, okay, so recently I have just begun to, I guess, name my mental health issues, and as I'm seeing therapists more, as I'm working with the internal medicine doctor more, and I've been continuously saying, like, it's a spectrum. It's the spectrum, right? And no one has ever kind of like said that to me. So it's really interesting to hear you say that. And as you think about, right, like, I love this definition that you gave. And my thoughts around that, if we hear that creativity includes people who are experimenters, creativity includes people who do all of these wide variety of things. Sometimes I wonder, can you be a creative and not be on that spectrum? Like, can you truly live into your creative self and not be on that spectrum? So I would love to hear what you all think about that, Stephen and Celeste.
So I'm just going to define creativity because I saw that question up on the screen.
Please.
Creativity for me is producing something that never existed. That's the way I define it. And mental health is like the ability to cope, for a person to cope with normal stressors of life. And that's a spectrum. I was speaking with Chris earlier about a definition that I heard earlier of a person. I heard many variations of PTSD, post-traumatic slave disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, a whole bunch of different definitions, but I heard a really unique one today. And what did I say it was, Chris? Because I'm failing to recall right now. It's persistent instead of persistent stress disorder. And he was referring to people who classify themselves as Black. And that's what people who classify themselves as Black continuously go through. So when we talk about mental health, the normal stresses of life for people who consider themselves Black is a little different than other folks who don't consider themselves Black. That's the way I define both of those. Something more about the spectrum that she was talking about.
So,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Doc.
I think if I understand your question, Mickey, is can you be creative without experiencing some kind of dissonance from normalcy, right? Can you not be along a spectrum of where your mental health is maybe compromised or not as well as maybe people might define it? And I think the answer to that is yes, you can, but you can also not be. You can be on either end of those things. I think it's important to take in consideration the stigma of what mental health is and how it's been perceived. socially, and even in some of the more targeted communities like Black communities and other communities who identify as communities of color, is not something that's widely accepted, widely discussed, or even, standardized in a way. If we could normalize this experience that, sometimes I'm good and sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm okay and sometimes I'm not. And during those time periods when I am not well or when I am well, I'm still a human and I'm still important and I'm still capable. But, you need support during those times. But you can be very creative. Some very creative individuals who struggle with mental illness that we can talk about at any point in time that you like are very famous individuals. But some of us are just regular people going throughout our day. And so I think, you can be along either side of those things and still be creative. But it is important to note that you can struggle with your mental health and still find creativity in looking at your passion and what you love and what you do.
Yeah. So something that really stood out to me about, both of your bios is that you both are in restorative justice, and then Celeste, yours with a more like ecological approach. So could you all take a moment to kind of just explain what it means to be a restorative justice practitioner in the mental health field, and then also what it means to take a ecological approach to this kind of work?
You want to take the first part?
Yeah. So being a restorative justice practitioner, the restorative practices were founded by Aboriginal people native to wherever land that you talk about. You could talk about Australia. That's where most people is widely accepted as being called Aborigine. But Aborigine are people that are native to any land. So the way they handle things, and the term restorative, it became prominent by a gentleman named Howard Zare. They call him the godfather of restorative practices. But he coined the term restorative justice when it became more prominent. But it's based in the holistic approach to health. So in communities, you have 4 components of humanity: the mental, the spiritual, the emotional, and the physical component of health. And when one of those quadrants of the circle is out of balance, there's dis-ease. So you want to be mentally healthy, you want to be spiritually healthy, you want to be emotionally healthy, and you definitely want to be physically healthy. In one of the practices that we use, the one that I use the most is in the peace circle, is when you sit in a circle and you have topic conversation. A lot of people look at circles as a way to resolve conflict. That is one of the strategies, and one that's really effective in solving issues amongst people. So that's what restorative practices are to me.
In addition to that, just restorative justice, and I guess in a more grander way, that's a great it's very important to have the historical context to what this practice means and what it looks like, because a lot of times what happens in our culture is things get appropriated and you don't know where they came from and you don't know where it originated, and you don't really have a context of why it is the way that it is. And so I'm so glad that Stephen talked about the historical context of it. But, the way in which you approach challenges and issues, and restorative justice is a theory-based idea that there is a healthy, this is a solution-focused way to really get at the root cause of issues and problems in a way that doesn't attack, that doesn't harm, that repairs things that have been broken or harmed, or instances in which people have that disease. And the ecological part of it comes into play is because as someone who is in community psychology and someone who is a clinician, I know that if a person shows up and they're hurting and they've been harmed and they've been hurt, that hurt doesn't just remain confined within just one part of their lives. That hurt doesn't just represent even if my mom was the one that hurt me, maybe that hurt spills over and it affects the way I show up in relationships, or maybe it affects the way I show up at my job and with my colleagues in my work or in social settings. And so restoratively, And in intermingling those two things, restoratively and mental health, as a clinician, I look at the person in their totality. Like, who are you at home? Who are you at work? Who are you with your friends? Because all of those pieces of you really serve to kind of paint the picture of where things are functioning and where they're dysfunctioning. And so again, you need that balance, because we can work on making you an excellent, like if you come in and say like, I'm just underperforming at work, like my boss is like on me, I need to do better. We can address that, but then how do you show up to your kids? How are you parenting? And where did your parenting styles, get models from? And so again, looking at a person, all their context and all their dynamic senses, because we aren't linear people, like we are complex beings. And so that's how those two things speak together.
That's awesome. Have you heard the term, and I'm sure you've heard it, but I haven't heard it as it relates to justice. I've heard it as it relates to community. So regenerative community growth versus restorative community growth. Have you heard kind of how those two are distinguished? Or
I haven't.
No.
I'm not that familiar.
So one thing that's in our concept paper for the organization and is really looking at versus, and what I love what you said, Doc, is about knowing those old ways, right, to really move through to something. But when we restore back to old versus regenerate, it allows us to take the energy and not necessarily go back to the old way, but take the old way and move it towards something new and regenerate that energy. So it's something I've just started to do research on, but I'm just trying to understand too for myself, what ways do we want to bring from the past forward, and what ways do we want to mold into the future?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
When excuse me, I'm sorry about that. When I was speaking to someone the other day about the recent events in the news about the murders of people identified as being Black in the media, a restorative approach to that, the criminal justice system is what is supposed to be restorative, but it's really, really punitive, especially to people that look like us. But a restorative approach would be to listen to the officer's side, the officer's perspective, and give him a reason to answer what happened, why did it happen, and then you have three components of a situation like that. You have a perpetrator, you have a victim, and then you have bystanders, people that were present, and it affects those people who are present, and through media, a lot of us are affected, and we're sort of bystanders in this situation. But the people who were there were affected the most, and the families, the people who were affected. But a restorative approach would be to sit down with these people and the people who were affected and let everyone hear how they were affected and impacted. But it takes a person to be able to create that space to do so. And in the old days, the elders, which are, and when I speak about elders, I'm talking about three components of being an elder. Having respect from the community, having knowledge, and having wisdom. That defines what an elder is. So elder is not necessarily defined by age, but defined by those three components. And if you have respect from the community and you have the knowledge and the wisdom, this is the person who the people in the community will go to and have this conversation like, hey, this is what happened. We need you to mediate this situation. So that's how this situation restoratively could be handled, by going to people in that community, the elders in that community, sitting them down, having the officer and his people, family members and people who's affected by it, even his children, having the family of the deceased, and having other people, and having them sit down and have conversations, and then for them to decide what ultimately happens. Once you hear someone's story and you create that space where you can share your story, you're not as apt to want to execute the person, because you're able to find that narrative of how this person became who it is. What if that man was raised by a racist dad, racist grandpa, racist grandma, and this is everything that he knew? So that would be a restorative approach, just to give you an example.
Okay.
I really love this, and I love hearing you all talk about this because it just makes me think about restorative in the sense of like return to balance, like a return to balance in a way. And then also I love this like ecological piece because I remember I was at one point in my life, I was working this job, y'all, and I was like really going through it with my manager. And in other places, I would begin to see how like if anybody did things that were similar to something that maybe my manager did, that kind of anger or that stress, it would spill over into other areas of my life. And I think, it's so important for us to recognize the same thing that you said, Celeste, is that people are not linear. We have so many different areas of our lives that need to be addressed. So I would love to hear you all talk about, because this is a conversation about creativity, and then also at the same time we want to bring in conversations about art. It seems a lot of like restorative practices boils down to conversation. Talking, storytelling. So can you all talk a little bit about I guess the do you see conversation and storytelling as an art form? And what kind of study, I guess I'm asking, what kind of study or skill or experiences does someone need to have or build in order to go into a place and be a restorative practitioner, if that makes sense?
That's a great question. I want to speak briefly to it, but I want to give Stephen the space to do it because he's been doing this work for a very long time and has a lot of experience in it. When we joined together and we, created our household, we have very similar passions, very similar drives to help others, to make things like wellness and service. And, those are things that we're passionate about. And so that's what drives, us. And I've always had this kind of clinical mindset, and he's always had this more community mindset. And so that's really where he was the practitioner and I was the clinician. And then we realized that we needed to incorporate both. So I got trained in restorative justice, and he's now getting his training in the clinical side of it. So he'll be licensed to be able to provide these services as well. But that's a great question. The skills that an individual needs, one, storytelling is absolutely an art. Being able to share in an efficient way, in an effective way, in a purposeful way. Those are all very important skills that an individual needs, but they're skills that any of us can really embrace should we choose to do so. And in order to be, really good at that, it's going to come with a lot of experience, but it's also going to require that you break down some of those barriers that exist from you in telling that story. Imagine, that you want to share something very intimate about yourself or some trauma that you've experienced, but it might help another person relate. But in sharing that, you might have fear of what other people may think of you because of something that you went through. If you were abused or you went through some kind of struggle with addiction or depression, like all of these things sometimes, they can take away from what could be. But if we really lean into that and we allow ourselves to share that part of ourselves and tell that story, it could open the door for so much more. And so maybe you want to talk about the restorative justice.
When you asked that question, I no one has ever asked me that question. But some of the qualities that you need, skills that you need integrity first and foremost. Not necessarily a skill, but you need integrity. You need to be respectful, because people come to spaces with a lot of stuff. I love giving examples. I've done many circles. I used to do five a day, 5 days a week at Oak Park River Forest High School. But there was one situation where I was in a circle with a person who identifies as Black and a person who identifies as a white female, and they had a child, and there was some issues going on, and so the two families brought the two families together, and the family who identified as white were super racist, and it came out in the space, and trauma all throughout the session. But I had to isolate myself and take myself and be objective. So objectivity is another one, to be able to hold that space so this person doesn't feel attacked, or this person doesn't feel that I feel some type of way. And as I got to know the person, like most people, they're good people, believe it or not. So you also have to be observant. When you're in the space, usually when you have more than 10 people, you want 2 keepers. So you can have an extra set of eyes and ears to pay attention to what's going on in the space. You want to have empathy. You have to be able to feel people and understand people, what they're going through. And the last one, I guess, a bit observant and attentive will go hand in hand. But those are the ones that come off right off for someone to be a practitioner. And facilitating peace circles is not just the only component of being a restorative justice practitioner. I tell people in my trainings and just in general, it's a way of life for me. Everyone has a story, and you don't know their story. So what informed this person to do this specific act? You don't necessarily know that, because I've done things in my life that I'm not even proud of, but because of what I did have up to that point, the knowledge that I did have up to that point, it informed me making those decisions that I look back and I sort of frown my face on right now.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment to honor y'all because I think that, and this is really important. I think we don't do this enough. I want to take a minute to honor you all, because I think that this storytelling, this conversation is it's something that we do so much that people can take it for granted, right? Like, oh, that's not an art form, or, oh, right, like, that's not hard. That's not challenging. When really it's one of the most simple things, and we know that simple things are the most challenging. So just want to take a moment to give you all some honor for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So we got a ton of questions here, so I'm just trying to pick a good one. How do you see the stigma around mental health in the Black community? Either slowing down or speeding up, right? Because number 1 killer is homicide, right? Number 2 is suicide, right? And a lot of that stems from depression. So how do you see that transitioning right now, or changing, or getting better, or getting worse, especially now with COVID? And obviously COVID aside, right? I think we have to look at it. COVID is messing with everybody, but that could be detrimental for our young adults as well. So how do you see that shifting right now?
I think in my work, I'm seeing a huge shift with certain generations. Millennials, I think, are like number 1 that comes to mind when I feel like they're more forward thinking. And so there's this tug and pull where I feel like the stigma is kind of breaking, but it's still kind of being upheld, because older generations, that of our parents and that of our grandparents, the idea of you needing to talk to somebody other than your family or your pastor is still too far outside of their realm of, who they are and their ideology about, what you need. And they are our foundation. They are the people who we got, these ideas from. But at the same time, there's this new generation that's like, nah, that don't work for me. Nah, praying ain't cutting it. It's not enough. This happened. You know what? I'm mad. I'm angry. I'm depressed. And I even have some people who like, they go to their parents. You do what? Talk to God. Like, that's it. That's all you need. And I'm a believer. I have a relationship with God, but you can have God and a therapist. You don't have to pick and choose. And I feel like there's this shift where I'm seeing a lot more people are coming toward, I need some help. I need some support. But they're being met with resistance from some people that are whose opinions and they value in their life. And so, I feel like the conversations are happening more. COVID and this racial crisis that is happening right now in America has really laid a platform out for mental health to be like, hey, this has always been here. Now, are you guys ready to have a conversation about it? And so I've been so happy with my colleagues and those who are mental health professionals and practitioners who are like, all right, now's the time to hit the ground. This is the grunt work. People are hurting, and some people are ready to talk about that hurt. So let's be available for that. Some people are not ready to talk about that hurt. And, you have to meet people where they are. But for those who are ready, let's get enough of those people to get the help that they need so we can just push out a whole influx, an army of people that are super stable, that can go out and challenge the world. And we can really see a shift that needs to happen for the changes that we want to occur.
Yeah.
I'll piggyback just a little bit to say a little piece on that. But I think that the stigma is not so prevalent as it once was. Now, that might be just reiterating what she said. But yeah, when I realized once I went to counseling services, I realized like, man, why didn't I do this a long time ago? But one of the issues that I did have, and no, I went to a person identified as white female, and I was able to have an objective point of view, a semi-objective point of view, but it still wasn't enough. I had to have a Black counselor because I felt like I got re-traumatized by having a white counselor. That was just my personal experience. I don't know what other people's experience is with counseling services. And that's why I chose to become a mental health counselor, because I noticed that there was a void as far as Black males are concerned, for us to go and have someone to talk to. So be the change. So I decided to go back to school and do that.
Yeah, it's so much to be said. I think about, I 100% agree with both of you all. I think that I don't necessarily think that there's a stigma anymore. I think that, not to say that it's 100% gone, but I definitely think it's decreasing. I think what the thing is now is that a lot of people of color, and I know that this was my experience, Black people, as a Black woman, I didn't have the language to name what was happening to me. So in my mind, I was just like, I think it was at a point where my mental health got even worse, because I started to be like, well, this is just who I am now. This is who I am. And it wasn't until like I started, it honestly wasn't until, because my therapist was pushing me, but it wasn't until I actually saw an internal medicine doctor who was like, okay, like, you acting like this don't exist, or you acting as if this is you, who you are, is not gonna make it go away. And unfortunately, I think with my family, my family's very supportive, very loving. But I think what happened is, and this will happen in Black families, it'll get to a point where like you have to have a full-fledged breakdown in front of your family for them to say, oh shit, this is real. Oh my God, there is something really going on with you. And I think that that's unfortunate. I can't just show up, or people can't just show up and be like, hey, I think I may be depressed, or hey, I may be having anxiety. It takes for you to literally like be shaking and saying, can you take me to the emergency room? For people to recognize that something is actually going on with you. And I think that that's unfortunate.
It is. And that's a really excellent point, and I'm so glad that you shared that, Mickey, because I feel like the conversations don't happen as often as they should happen And so now's a really good time to just, some things that I feel like, you know, we get caught up and wrapped up as a Black community in doing is normalizing behaviors that aren't normal, and really leaning into that as if, you know, if we, to the point of your doctor, like leaning into this doesn't make it go away. It intensifies it, because what you do is you compartmentalize these parts of yourself and these emotions, and it's like a wound that goes untreated and it festers, and, you know, you get infections. And by the time you actually get the treatment that you need, you know, it's grown so much and so big that now the intervention and the treatment that you need is so much more. And some people will go for so long in their lives, and sometimes their entire life, without trying to address any of those wounds. And so, you know, changing the language, changing the narrative, checking in with people. Now's a perfect time. And some people have fear of checking in with people because they feel like, well, what if they say something? I don't know what to say.
Well, I'm bothering them. I'm getting on their nerves.
Yeah, and you have to really quiet that part down and be like, no, I need to be there for somebody because I know it's important for somebody to be here for me. And this is how we embrace that collective experience as a Black people, and to create those safe spaces where it's like, hey sis, you good? And especially for Black men, because I feel like the conversations sometimes can be so surface and so just general that it seems so unsafe and uncomfortable to charter that territory. Like, man, you know, I'm not doing good. And you know, the what you do with the weight of someone sharing with you that they're not okay. How do you respond at that time, during that time? What do you say? And the best thing that you can say, is there anything that I can do to get you help, or is there anything that I can do for you?
Yeah.
And do what's within your means to do. No one's asking you to be a professional. No one's asking you to be a clinician. You don't have to be their therapist. You don't have to be their psychiatrist, but you can be a friend. You can be an ear. Sometimes people need to have that space where they can just share and talk and feel like, you know, they're not judged, and they don't have to feel shameful about what they say. You don't even have to have the right words to say. Sometimes silence is the best response, and just giving somebody that space because they've been holding it in for so long. So to your point about getting to that point where you feel like you're having that breakdown, how we can kind of mitigate a little bit of that is being more direct, intentional, and purposeful about having conversations with people in our lives. Everyone, your strong friend included, the person that you feel like definitely has it all together. They're probably the one that's hurting the most.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment to uplift some resources. I know that the therapist that I see, I found her on Therapy for Black Girls. So if you all are looking for a therapist, you can find one on there. I recently saw that they've added some Black men to that catalog, so I thought that was great. Also, there's this app. It's called Not Okay. And you can put numbers of maybe like 4 to 5 people in there. And when you're not feeling okay, you just click a button and it just automatically sends them a text message that says like, hey, Mickey is not okay. Can you give her a call and check on her? And I felt like that was so useful because it's so much easier to just hit that button than it is to send somebody a text and say, hey, I'm not doing all right. Can you check on me? So I would definitely, if anyone's out there watching, I would definitely recommend that mobile app. I want to go to you, Stephen, because I know you're in school right now, right? You're in school, you're studying. And I guess my question is around, and I'm pretty sure you all have these conversations at home because you all are kind of like in the same territory. So I'm really wondering, how has the theory around this stuff changed? You know, like, do you feel that what direction are we headed in? You know, like, what direction are we headed in? Because every time I talk, and I'm asking this question because every time I talk to like doctors and therapists and psychiatrists, right, they're like, well, it's not a lot of research out here about this. You know, we don't know much. We don't know much about this. And in my mind, I'm like, damn, with all these people suffering from this, you mean to tell me we don't know much? So with you being in school, right, I'm just interested in like, what direction do you feel like we're headed in? Do you feel like we're getting closer to a more well-rounded understanding of this?
And so I need to clarify
what the this is.
What the this, thank you.
Yes.
COVID, the COVID thisness.
Oh,
I think.
No, not COVID.
What do you mean thisness?
Not COVID.
The racial injustice thisness?
No. I'm talking about just an understanding around mental health complexities.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So I heard you earlier talking about language. What I'm getting out of going to school is getting language so they can understand what I'm saying. So clinicians and other people can understand, the academic type can understand what I'm saying. Because I can talk to you, I can talk to people, and they can understand what I'm saying. And so that's what I'm getting from it. This is what I'm learning. The language, I'm learning certain theories that I have already implemented in my practices that someone did before me. So I'm learning that as well. And I'm learning new theories too. I'm not saying that I know everything because like I shared with you earlier, I'm still learning. I'm always learning. So I'm learning different theories and techniques to get to certain points or to get certain information and to help people get what they need. Because ultimately that's what it's about, helping people get what they need. The counseling relationship is a partnership. It's not like people think that you're helping people. I'm helping people get definitions and clarity for themselves. That's the only thing that I'm doing in the counseling relationship. They have the problems. I'm just helping facilitate them getting to those problems. And I'm giving them strategies as well.
I just want to add that as far as people feeling like we're not getting closer to answers around the complexities of mental health and mental wellness, I'd have to challenge that ideology because I feel like there's a lot out there, not enough, but there's a lot out there to suggest how we should be moving forward. And the one thing that, first of all, we're talking about Black people living in a country and we're talking about 400 years of systemic oppression and racism. We're talking about we've been in like a pressure cooker, right? Because we've tried to have these dialogues, we've tried to have these talks, and there's no way that you can be Black in this country and at some point in your time be unaware that these problems exist. Not even if you feel like they've never affected you, but that they exist and that there's a history and that history is really ugly and nasty. Even if you have the way of thinking that maybe it's not as bad as it once was, right? Some people think that way. I don't think that way. I think it's still very bad. But I guess it's important to understand that there's enough information out there for us to know what needs to be done, but there's a lot of lack of enthusiasm about how we should go about getting it done. People know the change needs to occur. People know we need to be more purposeful about bringing Black people together. For hundreds of years, we have been placed in these positions where we've been taught to go against one another, or we've been told that we're not good enough, or we've been told that we don't belong in certain spaces. And so we have to break down all that really faulty, unhealthy ways of thinking, and we have to reconstruct new narratives about what our truth actually is. And we have to look back at where we came from and be like, this is not the reality. This is not the truth. This is something that was imposed upon me to support a system of oppression that was upheld for hundreds of years. This is not the way it should be. And it's really hard to break that narrative when, again, we've been programmed, indoctrinated. We've really been, taught that this is the way that it is, directly and indirectly. And so, for people to say, I don't know, where do we go from here? Or you can say, I don't know how we get to where we go, but you know where we need to go. You know what needs to happen. And I also want to just kind of bring up the fact that mental health and the history of mental illness and even the DSM, the theories that exist, the diagnoses that exist, the way in which they were developed was not researched off of Black people, off of Black clients. And so it's really important if you want to go and I'm on therapy for Black girls, and I'm a therapist and I love this work. But if you want to go and see a clinician and you want to go and see a therapist to put language and labels behind what's going on with you to help kind of understand and guide, make sense of the world that you feel like doesn't make sense, that's great. But don't let that label define you, and don't let that label, be the determinant of how well you can get. Because you have to understand that these labels weren't created with you in mind. So some parts may apply, but some parts may not apply. I still will diagnose people, but I understand they might not meet all of this criteria, and that's okay because there's cultural factors. This wasn't created for us. This wasn't created by us. So, it's okay to have a diagnosis, but don't let the weight of that, define you to the sense because it wasn't meant for you. And that's all I'm gonna say on that.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, particularly because I know for me working with a Black therapist, I don't know if someone else, like I remember one day we were in a session and she was like, yep, and this is what capitalism does. This is what you're getting to a point now in your life where you're actually beginning to see these systems in front of your eyes and it's messing with you, and I don't know if anyone else would have been able to speak to me that directly, speak to what I was experiencing in that way. So I do definitely see that. And then something else that I thought that I want to talk to you all about and get y'all thoughts on is you talked about how we have been indoctrinated, right? But I still feel that in so many ways we are still being inundated through the media, through the news, through social media, through all of these things. And it's so interesting to me how there are so many folks, and even I'll even say filmmakers of color, artists of color, creatives of color, that will dab in mental health, right? In Black mental health. But it's never a focused conversation. You have a platform of hundreds of thousands of people. Let's take, for example, I don't know if you all watch Insecure. Mm-hmm. But on Insecure, right, we have Nathan, and Nathan is I'm bipolar. And Tiffany is battling, postpartum depression. And I feel like the fact that they're bringing this to TV is great, but I don't think we get enough entertainment media that's okay, we're just going to touch on this for a second. We're not really going to have a real conversation about Black mental health. We're just going to put it in here so that we can say we talked about it. So I don't know. I guess maybe that's not a question. I guess that's me saying I'm looking forward to a day where we have national media that spotlights Black mental health rather than just tiptoes around it to say that we said something about it.
Molly's in the counseling relationship though.
Yeah, she is.
You know what I'm saying? They did touch on Nathan, and they did touch on Tiffany. But Molly is in a counseling relationship.
Yeah.
And it's helped her realize the counselor is really challenging her.
Yeah. And I think, I'm Insecure, I think is doing a good job. I don't think the show was created to your point, kind of highlight mental health disparities more than they are doing. But the fact what they are doing, I feel like is great because it kind of opens the door. So, for me to be watching the show or in a group chat with my girls and be and not maybe for me because they know what I do. So they know I have no quarrels about talking about mental health, but I struggle with postpartum depression. Yeah. That was extremely challenging for me. And I was able to overcome it. And here's how I did it. Making that conversation happen, it opened the door because, we saw something, it was relatable. It wasn't I had to come out of the woodwork with it. And again, I'm not the best example because my friends know, this is my life's work and I have no problem. But for somebody else being sometimes I go through some episodes where I feel like I need to just get away. I get what Nathan was doing. And maybe they haven't really seen a professional yet, but that's a segue. That's a segue to be man, have you talked to somebody about it? Do you want to talk to me about it right now? But recognizing again, do what's within your scope of, competence. You don't have to go and be their therapist, but being an ear and a friend to let them know that that's how you break that stigma. That's how you break that idea that this is something we don't talk about.
Yeah. I think that's so true. That one, right, like they did create a segue and open up the conversation. Because and this is why I say that this is important. You all are teaching me in a lot of ways, which I really love and appreciate. That I remember one time in my life when I first started to experience a lot of anxiety. I would try to bring up images of people in my head that, like, okay, if they got over this, I can get over this. Or if they're still living and they're still happy, I could be happy and still living. And wildly enough, in the beginning, the only people that I could think of, y'all, was Mary Kay and Ashley. I'm like, because I heard, right, like they had mental health issues. And I'm like, if they still making it, I can make it. But I think that, to bring this back to like what we see on TV, though Nathan is a fictional character, right? Though Molly is a fictional character, at the end of the day, being able to bring to the forefront of your mind an image of someone who may be struggling with some of the things that you can relate to is very, very, very important. So thank you all for mentioning that. So, Chris, how you doing?
I'm chilling, y'all. I'm good. I'm just soaking it in, trying to learn from all y'all. I'm learning from you, Mickey.
Good, good.
Let me ask y'all this. When you look at, emotional instability and it being something that can drive people to that place of depression, can it be advantageous as well? As we were talking about stories and hearing people's stories and hearing what people go through and the trauma they go through, how do we use that? How do we turn that into something positive so that we can create?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And earlier I kind of talked about some of the people who go through some severe kind of mental illness, or their psychopathology is more impacted, and they're still able to be successful. And so the way, I agree with you, I think it can be advantageous. I think you can have success in that, and I think you can create in that. I think you lean into it. For some disorders and for some people who are experiencing certain types of issues, when you feel like you need to shift maybe your anxiety, or maybe if you're someone who gets like a lot of excitement and sometimes you have a high mood, and maybe you don't necessarily meet some criteria for bipolar disorder or even borderline personality disorder, but you have these moments of high energy after you come from being very sad or you go through a low mood. You create in that time. You lean into that. You use that energy. If you feel like you need to clean the house, clean the house. If you feel like you can write a book in that moment, start your first chapter. There are a lot of stories of people who have created, successful people who have created. And it's funny, you say Mary Kay and Ashley are the people that come to mind to you when you think about mental illness. But people like Brandon Marshall, people like Taraji P. Henson, Jada Pinkett Smith, struggled with depression. Taraji P. Henson has been very vocal about her struggles with anxiety and depression. Brandon Marshall struggled with borderline personality disorder. Kanye West and Jennifer Lewis both talk about their struggles with bipolar disorder. And you can look at them and be like, but they look at them, right? Like you see what you see, but you don't know what you don't see, right? And so it's important to keep that in mind for them to have these conversations, with everyone else. I'm so happy that they do, but in order to be creative, in order to be advantageous, in order to be successful, you lean into those things. I think you definitely can have success in those moments, but you also need support. I don't think you just do it without having, access to people who can support you, especially mental health professionals who can help facilitate, what you do when you have those moments and you feel like, I'm not well. How do I handle this? So I think it's necessary to really be diligent about creating a supportive environment, but also knowing that you're not confined or limited. You can still be great in those moments.
I would say that I want to say that, you know, I didn't understand that question. No, I guess I misinterpreted the meaning of that question when I read it, Chris. Because I want to say, like, I think something that we need to do is shift the narrative around creativity and like mental health and being depressed, because for so long I had this thought in my mind. I don't know if you all watch Little Fires Everywhere, but in Little Fires Everywhere, there's this part where Kerry Washington asks, "Where does the art begin? Where does it begin?" And when she said that, I immediately was like, pain and suffering, right? And I think there's this narrative that says, like, you know, your creativity comes from being sad. You know, your creativity comes from like trauma or something along the lines of that. You know, you create out of that. And I know that that's something that I felt, right? That's something that I felt. And in some instances, I have felt like I need this pain to be creative. Right, I need this art, I need this trauma to be artistic. But as I'm growing and as I'm learning, I'm like, nah, you know, you can also create from a place of joy. There's also freedom in creating and being artistic from happiness. So just wanted to name that because I think that that is something that I hear a lot in terms of like, I need to be creating from a place of pain or trauma or something like that.
Yeah. So we got a few minutes left, y'all. What do you wanna say? Because obviously there's a lot of young gentlemen, a lot of young females, a lot of older men, a lot of older females that are struggling right now with COVID going on and with all the racial tension going on, whether it be in their workplace or on their block. What's some advice that you guys want to leave the people with, just to help them get through their next couple weeks,
or some resources, any resource that you all can think of?
Yeah, telehealth is definitely an option during this time. And to be honest, I never thought that it would be as effective. I've been doing virtual circles. And like the whole point in doing peace circles is being present, being able to see someone's body language, having no obstructions in the circle space, just having an open line to the person. But they have been fairly effective through this time. You don't know what you don't know, but now I know. So telehealth is definitely an option for those who do have insurance. And I'll let Celeste talk more about that. But telehealth is effective. Having someone to talk to when you're in close proximity with people such as your relatives, your spouse, like I'm gonna use our statements. I personally don't want to burden her with certain things, so I do have a therapist that I can go to and talk out different things without burdening her with when she has a ton of stuff that she's going through already or have something on her face. So having someone to talk to is a positive way, and that people can help combat whatever issue they're experiencing during this pandemic. As far as resources, so at the Oak Park Public Library, we give out free mental health assessments. Currently, we're working on the structure now. It was Wednesdays from 9 a.m. to 1. Anybody from anywhere, it doesn't matter. You can come get a mental health assessment from a clinician from Rush, Chicago. We facilitate that partnership maybe about to be a year in October. So anybody can come in and get a mental health assessment, and you don't have to pay for it. And that for some is a barrier to prevent them from actually getting to the services. We have a range of people that come in that you would least expect that will come in. People initially thought that certain population of people would be the ones utilizing it, but we have people come from Naperville, LaGrange. Once people found out that you can come and have a confidential mental health assessment to get you to a therapist or to get you some of the resources, because some people need that assessment in order to access some of those resources that the government gives or other agencies actually give. So they need that diagnosis or need that assessment to get those resources. So that is the only free space that I know of. If there are any others, please share. But the Oak Park Public Library does have that, and we will have it virtually. We're working on the logistics of that, but we will have that resource virtually as well.
Nick, you mentioned earlier therapy for Black girls. It's a great resource. For the advice that I can give and what I want to leave people with is that you don't have to go through this alone, and you shouldn't go through this alone. So lean into the support that's available for you. If you feel like there are people that in your life you can have conversations with, and after those conversations, you find yourself feeling a little bit relieved, or you find yourself feeling less isolated, or you find yourself in a better headspace mentally than when you engage in that conversation, good. Lean into those people. If you find yourself having conversations with people and you feel more tense after you've shared something with them, or you feel more triggered after, you're watching the news, they're watching the news, you're on social media, they're on social media, and then you just got a whole big old tension ball, that's not the person that you want to engage with during these times. Create distance and be okay with knowing that distance needs to exist. Do what you need to do to protect your mental health during this time. And then absolutely, I would suggest finding someone that you can talk to professionally, someone who can really help facilitate and help you navigate these challenges that you're going through, because there is no one linear solution for how people can cope during this time. The way that you cope is so based on and subjective to the experiences in your life. And, that's where a mental health professional can come in and kind of help you work through those things, because what may work for you may not work for somebody else. And that's okay. So I really just want to emphasize that this is not something that you have to experience by yourself. And there is support out there. And if you feel like you have a network, lean into that network. And if you feel like that network doesn't exist, then really reach out to a mental health professional during this time.
I have three things that came up. Meditation, and they're all encompassing: meditation, breathing, and yoga. And Daryl Satcher in the community does leading man yoga. G in the community, Professor Satcher. I think he's working at, I'm not sure where he's working at. I think he's working at the Core Power on Madison. I know that's where he got trained, but he is a person that does amazing work with yoga. When I initially got in yoga, it was first to nurse an injury because I was starting to get old. I was playing flag football, and I was having some injury issues, and so I started stretching. And then one of my good friends introduced me to yoga, and I started doing it. And I was like, man, like I feel better. I haven't had that injury since. I'm not practicing yoga as much as I should, or at all for that matter. But breathing, taking the time to breathe. And that goes with the third thing, meditation. When I get up, I like to try to come in the office, sit on my yoga block, and set my timer for 15 minutes, and to balance myself for the day. And it always makes me have a better day. It helps me to process better. Those are some things that don't have a cost associated with it. You can go online to figure out some yoga poses and how to do it. And you can do it from the comfort of your own home. And sometimes you just need to breathe, because getting oxygen to different parts of your body will help you function better, especially your brain. So those are three things I can think of right offhand.
Thank you all for sharing that. I want to uplift everything that you all mentioned today and just give you all some honor again. It's nothing more that I can say than that I honor you all. And for those of you out there listening, I think the best thing that I ever did for my mental health was to just break the ice, like to just come out and say, hey, somebody that I felt like I could trust. I don't feel like something is not right. Break that ice, do what you have to do, download these apps. It's so many apps out here nowadays that you can access for free. Stephen, Celeste, thank you so much for having this conversation with us tonight. It's so much more that I want to talk about, but we're out of time. And I just want to say thank you again tonight for joining with us.
Thank y'all for the invitation. We honor what y'all doing as well. Appreciate
Absolutely.
y'all.
Yes, thank you.
Have a good night, y'all.
All right, y'all
You
do
too.
the same.
All right.
Peace.
Peace.